My name is Intisar Durham. I am the senior judge for this presentation today. I would like Akiko to introduce herself as well as Jeff, the other judges. Briefly introduce yourself.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Akiko Murakata. I work at Epson in the Environmental and Sustainability Division. My job mainly focuses on environmental regulatory affairs, and I also support sustainability projects at Epson.
My name is Jeff Thies, and I'm a clinical associate professor of management. The clinical means I'm a business guy teaching business. And I also direct the Institute for Business Ethics and Sustainability at Loyola Marymount and oversee this competition. Related to my business experience, I'm a former mission integration executive with a $5 billion integrated healthcare delivery system. Before that, I was a direct mail marketing executive. And just really happy to be with you today.
Thank you so much, Jeff. As I told the other teams before, I always look forward to April of every year because I do have the honor to sit in and listen to these exciting presentations. So again, I'm an engineer by training, and I'm an engineering executive for a multinational company based here in Los Angeles. I do have a short announcement before you get started, but your 25 minute starts as soon as you start, so it's not when I am talking, because I do talk a lot. So again, I would like to let you know that in this competition, you are taking a fictional business identity and assuming a fictional business identity giving a fictional business identity to the judges. Please make sure everyone knows who you are and who they are before you begin. You will have again 25 minutes to describe the legal, financial, and ethical dimensions to the problem and to recommend a solution that passes muster on all fronts. During this time, teams will be uninterrupted, we promise, to kind of let you go. When you are finished, we will be asking questions for about 10 to 15 minutes, still in character. After the formal Q&A, we would like to give you some feedback, much more just again out of character. But again, you have 25 minutes and the floor is yours.
And welcome everyone. We are Kombu Consulting, also known as KCG. We are partnering with you all as leaders in Cascale to refine the HIG index for the running footwear industry. So today we are going to define the problem that you all had us investigate through the lens of the Sustainable Development Goals. We're going to identify our business solution, which has 3 parts, and we're going to address the sustainability and ethics and legal and financial impacts. So at Kombu Consulting, we center ourselves on the Sustainable Development Goals. And for this particular project, we evaluated Cascale and specifically the running shoe industry through the lens of SDG 12, which ensures sustainable consumption and production patterns, and SDG 13, which supports taking urgent climate action to combat climate change. We began our analysis with the evaluation of your organization, Cascale. We noted that you're standing as a nonprofit alliance with over 300 leading brands. Your mission is connected to our focus on the SDGs, naming collective action through tangible tools, aligning a global community, and impact at scale. You have key running shoe market leaders already within Cascale, brands such as Brooks, Allbirds, and Nike, to name a few. We also noted your HIG index with over 40,000 organizations involved. And this is one of the most widely standardized measurement frameworks, which includes 3 areas and 5 tools that help companies identify, understand, and measure areas of improvement. Looking briefly at the HIG index from a high level, the first area with 1 tool is the brand and retail tool, which assesses sustainability in company operations across the key impact areas. The product area includes two highly popular tools, the Higg Material Sustainability Index, also known as the Higg MSI. In our interview with the Running Footwear company, they named this tool as the most impactful to current practice, and we noted this tool in other companies' website product details. The Higg product module is also within this area. And finally, the facility tools area includes two final tools, the Higg Facility Environmental Module and the Higg Facility Social and Labor Module, which help paint a holistic picture of a sustainability improvement in manufacturing facilities. And though we noted the strong work that you all have already done with your measurement index, we also found evidence of ethical impact. In 2022, H&M faced a class action lawsuit for using misleading information regarding their clothing sustainability scores on H&M's website. This misleading information was sourced from the Higg MSI tool, which had used information with implicit bias toward fossil fuel-based materials. Natalie and David on my team will cover this further in ethics and legislation, but this highlights one of the key reasons why we believe that reinventing the Higg methodology would be extremely beneficial for your company. Now that we've looked at Cascale from the bird's eye view, we would like to narrow in on our industry of focus for this project. What we found was not just significant on a business level, but also on a sustainability and ethical level as well. The running shoe industry is rapidly growing. It's projected to grow from 14.2 billion to 25 billion by 2032. To put this into perspective, there are over 50 million Americans who run or exercise, and 90% of footwear is ending up in landfills. A single pair of running shoes generates 14 kilograms of carbon emissions, and the average running shoe only lasts 4 to 6 months. From there, our team evaluated key Cascale running shoe brands through the lens of the consumer. We looked at shoes from New Balance, for example, and we saw the life cycle assessment and the carbon impact. We looked at Allbirds and noticed that they deviated from standard industry practice. The Brooks 16 showcased recyclable materials and their percentages. Our look into Solomon showed us the fully recyclable shoe and named that this could reduce carbon emissions. And finally, the Nike shoe also showcased a process for their carbon emissions and their cradle-to-gate carbon measurements. So going into this evaluation, we thought sustainability reporting in the footwear industry would be a bit like a nutrition label, but that's not what we found. Instead, we identified several key gaps. First, companies collect and report sustainability data in very different ways. There's no common standard for what gets measured or how it gets reported. Second, even when companies do not report things like carbon footprint or materials, the metrics aren't consistent. They use different units, as you can see here, assumptions, and reporting scopes. The key terms aren't clearly defined. We saw things like carbon sequestration, chemical compounds, and really, what does it mean to be recyclable? Finally, from the consumer perspective, it has often felt like we're relying more on the company's marketing than on a centralized tool like the Cascale Index, because access to Cascale and Higg was limited to paywalls and restricted to members. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Maya to take it from here.
Thanks, Trier, for setting the scene. So as Trier walked us through, we know now that the running shoe industry is facing a systematic issue, and that is a lack of standardized metrics and transparent reporting on sustainability. This matters because this leads into a potential ethical issue. What we identified was that companies risk misleading consumers with either vague or inconsistent claims, as Trier talked about, and this comes from their varied both measurement processes, their reporting metrics, and different definitions. And that leads to making it really difficult for consumers to hold companies accountable and make decisions with comparable data. We really wanted to address that although the Higg Index has really been an industry game changer and your work has been strongly admired for your leadership in providing unified sustainability best practices and reporting. We do think that it might be time to reassess and perhaps update the Higg Index. So with this in mind, the problem that we're addressing is that the industry needs transparent, affordable, and reliable ways to measure and report on standardized sustainability benchmarks that all brands can adopt. So we came together as a team, and we're very excited to present to you our business solution, which is spelled out here in our roadmap. This has 3 different parts to it. The first is to implement a updated, what we're calling the Kombu Higg Index, or KHI, which is a measurement framework. This relies very heavily and is based heavily on the existing Higg Index, but we will talk about updating specific methodologies and generally just standardizing and clarifying how companies can use the KHI and then translate that into information for consumers to make more better informed decisions. Step 2 talks about improving consumer understanding and accessibility through the adoption of the KHI. Again, this is a roadmap, so all the steps build on each other. And then finally, most importantly, is really if we have you all at Cascale on board with this plan, what you have done in the past with really standardizing the industry with the existing Higg Index has been really powerful and a really great example. But we hope that if you're on board with this plan, that you will both support and advocate for the adoption of the KHI for both the existing Cascale members as well as potential future members and the broader industry. Just also want to note that while our business solution was designed with the running shoe industry in mind, something that we noticed was that there are similar issues across industries, and we believe that one of the strengths of our business solution here is that it can easily be adjusted to support any industry. So jumping into step 1, I'm going to cover step 1. My colleague Eric will cover steps 2 and 3. So step 1 is implementing the KHI framework. So again, this is really going into updating and building onto the existing Higg Index. But the goal here is really to improve clarity and increase the specificity of what the measurements are so that consumers and companies can both more easily understand if a company is successfully meeting the sustainability benchmarks that it hopes to. So a couple of the points here that we're going to jump into within step 1. These are just a couple highlights that the existing Higg Index and our updated KHI will cover. So there's a lot more to it, but we're just going to highlight these due to time constraints. So looking a little bit into comprehensive assessments and reporting. If the way that we've laid this out is that we have a general problem statement and solutions that we offer. I'm just going to highlight some of the key points here. So in general, companies have varied methods for collecting and reporting data, what they collect and report on, different definitions for the same benchmarks. And so there's a lot of variation even within the existing Higg framework for how companies collect and report out information. Our goal is to standardize that by providing more clarity on what definitions are, more specific baseline measurements, and just giving companies a more clear roadmap to follow when they hope to attain more sustainable benchmarks. Moving on to open source. The goal here is to just make it easier for both companies and consumers to understand what they're looking at. It's really difficult for both industry professionals and consumers to make informed decisions if they can't trust or understand the data that they're being presented with. And so again, aligning with our hope to standardize in more detail the KHI, we hope that consumers will more easily be able to compare what they're looking at and have a better sense of the information that they're being presented with. And the same goes for other industry professionals. If they see good examples of similar brands doing the work that they hope to do, it's easier to model and enforce. Moving on to carbon footprint. This was a point that was highlighted to us by an industry professional. And so just to point out the idea of leaning into the cradle to grave life cycle measurement, which includes all 5 cycles of all 5 stages of the life cycle process. There's a lot of variation to how this is measured right now, and that is just one of the more specific standardizations that we would recommend companies adopting. But again, here the idea is to standardize with as much specificity as possible while allowing companies to have flexibility that may come from their budgets or from where they are in their sustainability reporting practices. And then finally, looking at synthetic versus renewable materials. This is another point that was raised to us by an industry professional. And in short, it's a lot more difficult to have clear tracing of materials when they're synthetic, and therefore the impact that they have during their extraction and utilization process. And so if we shift more towards natural renewable materials, then that is a lot more allows for a lot more consistency in reporting. And also it's just clear to trace and easier for consumers to understand what is the material that we are working with. So with that, I'm going to pass this over to my colleague, Eric.
Thank you, Maya. Now I'll go over the second part of our solution roadmap, which is building understanding and accessibilities for consumers. With that, it starts at the foundation of having transparent measurements, which then builds up to having standardized marketing language across the brands. And finally, it is then having clear consumer labels, allowing consumers to make apples to apples comparisons. I will now talk about what these transparent measurements will be made of. It will be composed of 8 parts, and it will touch upon the factors that Maya has talked about previously, where we want a cradle to grave life cycle assessment of the carbon footprint, the water usage. And this will be built upon open data and also published calculation methods so that people that are not Cascale members can also audit the results. And this will prevent the greenwashing that Natalie will talk about later on. And also, these new frameworks will ultimately align with regulatory standards across the globe, which David will then talk about the upcoming international standards that will be that are impacted. I will now talk about how Kombu Index recommend Cascale to have more clear and accessible definitions. Just as like Tria has touched upon earlier, a lot of the marketing material out there right now is very hard to compare. For example, the Brooks running shoe that is certified carbon neutral versus the Allbirds Moonshot Net Zero shoe. It is hard to make that comparison on, as a consumer, which one is the more sustainable choice. And with having these definitions clearly spelled out for consumers in a centralized educational material, consumers can now better make informed decisions. This leads up to our recommendation, and a possibility for Cascale to explore is having clear consumer labels, like nutrition labels, that allow consumers to make healthy eating decisions. Having something like a QR code-based system that leads consumers to a standardized table where the formatting is the same, so that consumers don't need to click through various product detailed descriptions or go through each of the companies' like sustainability reporting. This is one standardized format that consumers can now make head-to-head comparisons. However, all of this will come down to Cascale would need to take leadership and advocate for industry-wide adoption. As listed here are logos of all the companies that are leaders within the running industry that are Cascale members, and many more who are manufacturers and brands in other apparel industry that is not listed here. If Cascale makes the push to drive this adoption of standardization of sustainable language and having clear consumer labels, this can be truly a global positive impact. Lastly, I'll end with our recommended timeline. It'll start with 3 phases of firstly, bringing together all the stakeholders table, defining the definitions, and then which leads to having a pilot program to test out the clear labels so that we could see how consumers are reacting. And finally, Cascale will aim to become the industry standard so that brands could aspire to become more sustainable, and consumers can now make better sustainable purchasing decisions. I will now pass to Natalie, who will now go over the ethics and sustainability in more detail.
Thanks, Eric. Hi, everyone. So there are several ethical issues that we've discussed and touched on with the Higg Index that we are trying to improve with our solution from Kombu. So 2 of those are interrelated: the lack of data transparency on material emissions, specifically within the Higg MSI tool, with the bias towards fossil fuel-based materials. On a similar note, the lack of accountability publicly taken by Cascal when it comes to the sourcing of information for these ratings. Together, these factors enabled greenwashing, as previously mentioned by Tria, with the H&M class action lawsuit filed over their misleading environmental scores in 2022. Something that I want to touch on is that as a consequence of this lawsuit, Cascal, being attached to this lawsuit, had to suspend use of all consumer-facing sustainability profiles. This removed accessibility to consumers that otherwise would have been beneficial for their shopping process if this information was in fact based on facts. Another ethical issue with the Higg Index is the inconsistencies in the carbon footprint labeling across brands that are members of Cascal. And specifically, something that Higg has perpetuated is this reliance on this notion that recycled polyester is a sustainable alternative to other synthetic material options. But this is misleading, because if we look at the tangible bad, recycled synthetic materials can still take much longer than more natural materials to decompose in the landfill. So our solution is proposing it'll be advancing 3 positive ethical values that are interconnected, and those include transparency, loyalty, and sustainability. With our solution being open source and comprehensive the entire shoe life cycle, cradle to grave, this is now transparent, and it'll be easily. And with this transparency, there's now loyalty to the users of the Higg Index. So not only analysts from these footwear companies that are looking to calculate their carbon footprint and their sustainable reporting. Now there is loyalty demonstrated to meet those users. Together, now consumers can really make ethical choices that are truly sustainable and not greenwashing, that have a much smaller carbon footprint.
Did she get stuck?
I think so.
I think she's frozen.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, sorry, did it freeze? Okay.
You're okay, Natalie. We got you back.
Oh, good. Okay. We could go to the next slide. All right. So to conclude the ethics portion of the presentation, this solution is in unification with one of the key missions of unified sustainable impact at scale. And we believe that with this solution and all these footwear brands that are already members of Cascal, that there will now be industry aligned, no longer, deferring sustainability efforts, but now these efforts will be collaborative within the industry. And we believe that this benefits Cascal as much as the climate impact of these shoes. And I'll pass it on.
And I think you broke off at the end, but I'll take it from here. In our last 4 minutes together, I will cover the legislative and financial aspects of our proposal. So first, it's important to clarify Cascal is not breaking any laws. However, it's not keeping pace with emerging legislation. For example, Maya spoke about cradle to grave. Eric spoke about consumer labels. Those are each core requirements in some international legislation you see in front of you. Our solution simply aligns what the index offers with what's emerging around the world. It's going to be a similar case with state laws on the next slide. The one I'll call out is the New York bill, which calls for greater supply chain transparency. Again, we talked about implementing open source solutions. It's important to note that even though the Higg Index, it's technically legal, One risk is consumers may feel deceived, not understanding how the index may align with these state bills. So on the next slide, we'll jump into some consumer lawsuits. Some of these were dismissed. Some of these ended up ruling against the companies. I think the core takeaway is consumers care not only about the efficacy of sustainability efforts, but about the transparency consumers, like the information they're getting from the companies. One specific case I think I'd like to jump into is on the next slide, which is Dwyer versus Allbirds. Allbirds was sued for making misleading sustainability claims. The court ended up aligning with Allbirds, but they kind of had some harsh feedback for Cascale, saying the case was more criticism of the tool's methodology. And we contend that actually looking at the next slide, Cascale could itself find itself as a defendant in a similar type of case. So with these financial risks laid out in front of you, the one I'll mention, we talked about H&M a couple of times. Even though they technically settled, they did agree to donate several hundreds of thousands of dollars. We also on this slide left off some implicit financial outcomes, such as loss of business due to consumer trust. So why should Cascale adopt our proposal? We've got 4 main business reasons. First, Cascale has operated at a loss in the last 2 years. Our solution strengthens Cascale's product position and gives them more relevance in the industry. 2, Cascale membership is also decreasing in terms of revenue. So our proposal is in line with emerging industries where members seek more tangible services than just wanting a membership. Third, our proposal aligns with member expectations. In that Allbirds case, the defendant said had she known the truth about Allbirds shoes, she would not have bought them or would have paid less for them, which is not why consumers and even members participate with Cascale's index. And last, we believe our proposal is financially sound. Cascale currently spends about $1 million on legal fees. They have a robust labor force that spends $7 million a year on head count. So we believe existing staff is in place to handle this change. Ultimately, the benefit resides with Cascale to evolve its product. These are the reasons why the members would want that to happen. That wraps up our presentation. Thank you for considering our recommendations, and we're now happy to open up for questions.
Thank you so very much for this very, very informative presentation. I would like to start the Q&A, the formal Q&A session by asking, I know I heard a lot about why Cascale should be undertaking these revisions or these changes and creating this KHI framework, new framework. But then I really didn't hear anything about, so what's going to from an ethical perspective, what's going to drive these companies, participating companies, to comply with these new standards?
I can start that off, and I think our group can all comment on it. But I think due to time constraints, I could definitely go into more depth with the ethics. I think companies can certainly be motivated to make these changes within their system, because we see that I had on my slide that 64% of consumers are interested in making this kind of sustainable purchase. And I think climate impact is increasingly more important to more and more people with the environmental crisis that is happening right now. And I think that companies, if they were to truly take accountability and be transparent with consumers, I think that there's a growing appreciation for those kind of values, and then they would actually make better sales, maybe compared to other shoes that they on the market that aren't sustainable or greenwashed.
I'll jump in next to this, which is these companies are already a part of the Cascale Alliance. And so they've signed on to the mission of supporting climate and supporting sustainability efforts. What we're recommending is that they're taking this to a next step further to become the gold standard and not just the everyday acceptance of what we're trying to do. So I would say that these companies are already on the right path, but we're trying to provide them the best possible roadmap to becoming that gold standard.
And if I may jump in as well, when you have a framework that is standardized in a way that has really concrete benchmarks and a process to follow, companies will save money because they will not have to, on their own, establish their own sustainability practices and invest in figuring out how to report, what to report. This new framework will lay all of that out for them. Of course, they can add on to that as they would like, but this will probably save many companies significant funds that would go into their equivalent of a sustainability department.
That was really good, very good answer. So the thing that I am concerned about, especially for us here at Cascale, is so how much is it going to cost us to implement this new, and to make it formal, to make this framework formal, formalize it?
Yeah, I'll
Have you
jump
looked
in
at
here.
that?
Yeah, so we did not do a large scale financial analysis, but there were a couple things we found that make us pretty optimistic this is doable within Cascale's current framework. So first, I mentioned Cascale's overhead for labor is $7 million. That actually includes a director of transparency as reported on its 990. So we think from a staff perspective, you might already have infrastructure there. We also noted, and I think I said this in the presentation, Cascale already spends $1 million on legal fees. They also spend about $1 million a year meeting with clients and customers. And so I think part of that shift might be instead of looking to customers, looking more at regulators, seeing what laws, what policymakers are doing and thinking, and maybe spending more efforts aligning with them.
Okay. Akiko?
Yes, a lot of really good ideas. I'm just concerned though, just another, cumbersome reporting framework. I feel like maybe, the bigger corporations will have more of the resources to take this on. And what about, the smaller companies or, even countries that are, maybe developing, but, they still have some great sustainable ideas for shoes. Is it skewing more heavily towards these bigger established shoe companies, do you think?
Something that we didn't directly address, but I've talked about in terms of our rollout of how this would work, is that there would be different tiers for organizations, companies with different budgets. And so we understand that companies of different scales and of different maturities have different amounts of funding that they can allocate to looking into their sustainability practices. And so part of the rollout would be to make this more accessible for companies with varying budgets. And so, there would be different tiers for, let's say, a startup organization with a small budget versus Nike. And the expectations would also, while the measurements and the frameworks would be the same, they would be adapted so that affordability would be taken into account. And that's one of the key parts of wanting to make this new framework a little bit more accessible for companies across the board.
And I have one addition to that, Maya. Thank you for kicking that off, is that we talked to members in the industry who are doing this work and or is a mid-level organization, but they shared their insights when they've talked to other organizations as well. And they shared that the first step in this process is to identify priorities. And so we know this is happening across the running shoe industry. And so what we could recommend with this new index is that companies have a means in which to define their sustainability, not that they need to respond with everything on the matrix, but they could share in a transparent and transferable way, like what their priorities would be. So if it is a smaller organization that still has great ideas and they're doing really well in one area, where our hope is that this index would still provide them the language in which to report on that one area.
And I think
Yeah.
one thing I'll add to Tria and Maya is that when we did talk to this sustainability analyst at a running footwear company, mentioned this presentation, he had said that one of the problems he encountered was that he had to buy several software packages to accomplish the information needed to report thoroughly what he wanted. So for example, the HIG MSI we mentioned only measures cradle to gate. Other software packages out there, these frameworks, you can purchase them and they give more thorough reporting of that full comprehensive to end of life cycle. So with this solution that we're proposing, they can perhaps actually save money, these smaller organizations, by just focusing on one. You don't need to get all this other stuff.
And I might, Akiko, just jump in real quick to say these smaller companies may have to report anyways for state regulation. So instead of your product sort of amplifying the data that has to be tracked and the different types of reports, I think aligning it from that perspective could also help smaller companies.
Thank you. Jeff, are you still on?
Yes. Yeah. So I want to understand a little bit more about the ethics because you use this tangible bad, tangible good kind of contrast to highlight the three dimensions of ethical values that you identified: transparency, loyalty, and sustainability. And I don't understand sustainability as an ethical value. Could you explain to me why sustainability is good? What kind of reasoning do you use to be able to help me understand that sustainability is good?
The reasoning behind that was given its interconnectedness to those other values that I mentioned, the loyalty, transparency. So the sustainability is almost a result of those two, and it would be kind of that tangible impact on the environment that I consider an ethical good, because that is like a reduction in the carbon footprint that these purchases would leave, which was in direct contrast to how it is kind of now with purchasing decisions that are a little more ethically muddied in the water as a result.
Yeah.
So good is defined by impact and also by clarity.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
I can add to that in that why sustainability is an ethical decision that needs to be considered, and that it's about what this generation's legacy to the next generation, and that is it ethical for this generation to like hog the resources and not leave enough for the next generation? Is it ethical that this generation leaves the world in a worse place than it was when this generation started? So in that sense, sustainability is beyond just about the current times, but it's ethics about the impact to the generations after.
One other question, and then to the other judges. Thank you very much for that. So if I heard you correct, you said that Nike in their statement says that the use of recycled and synthetics they claim as sustainable, and yet you would posit based on the standards of impact that the very use of synthetics is not sustainable, and that you would recommend a move to more natural components in the shoe. Is that correct?
I think if I could take a first stab at this question, in the long run, I believe that that is the vision that we would like to encourage companies to work towards. We understand that that might take a long time for many companies who've invested a lot and are far along the product development line for a number of different products. However, yes, I think, part of, and this touches, I think, on the ethical question of sustainability as well. Part of working towards more sustainable practices is adapting what already exists and making potentially some sacrifices. Maybe one of those is what the material is. And so, and also to point out, one of the reasons why we highlighted Nike, among other companies, was because their sustainability claims are difficult to track, even if it is though it is a synthetic material. And so it's difficult to go back and actually see, what is the carbon footprint for a material that is so blended, or how did they track this? At what point in the product life cycle did this start? So I would say, although it's a complicated question with nuanced responses, the long-term goal would be yes.
I also
So-
think, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, so maybe if you could just reflect on this. So your KHI framework then is really very revolutionary because it becomes a process whereby you want to bring transparency, which would prompt companies to fundamentally re-engineer their processes and their products.
Yeah,
Is that fair? Could you talk to us about that?
Yeah, I'm happy to take lead here, Jeff. So thinking about this Allbirds case, there was a pretty significant disconnect between what the consumer was buying and what the company was producing. And I think our index, it's not necessarily trying to set the standard in a way, but it's really trying to connect those two pieces. It's trying to connect the consumer to really inform them, what are you actually buying, which I feel like kicks off this feedback loop, hopefully outside of a court system. But it then starts the conversation of, okay, these goods are not what a consumer wanted to buy. They could then give direct impact into these manufacturers. And that would be informed by the adjusted index.
Thank you.
So now we get to the to the fun stuff. I really enjoyed your presentation. I liked that you stayed in character and that all of you participated, especially with the Q&A. So everybody took turn. I liked your slides, especially the ones that did not have so much text. I should have my glasses, but it was difficult sometimes when the slide was full. I loved your roadmap slide. I mean, it's just speak about, okay, one picture covers 1,000 words. So that was very good. But yeah, other than that, it was a very well researched subject. I learned a lot, and want to thank you very much for an excellent effort.
Yes, well done, team. I thought your slide decks were very clear, and I could tell that all of you did your research. You presented very well. And I actually learned a lot of information, and I hope something like this could actually be implemented. So great job, and congrats on your presentation.
The thing, and yeah, and it's hard to do in Zoom. You all have great stage presence, and that's really difficult to pull off virtually. But that reflects a lot of knowledge about the material. There's an ease of presenting. You're very articulate, and you are engaging. And so you did a really good job on those pieces of it. Really want to congratulate you for that. A couple of observations for you to think about. And so part of it is my bias, and you don't have to agree with me, but I tell students that sustainability is not an ethical value per se, but it is an ethical imperative because of other values. So Eric, you started to get there when you talked about the legacy piece, and really what do we owe our children and grandchildren, the next generation? Is there an issue of justice here? Is there a fundamental unfairness of what is being created through the impact, Natalie, that you talked about? Is there a question of rights? Do your children and grandchildren have a right to a healthy environment, that therefore you have a responsibility to build sustainable processes and products to deliver that kind of thing? So, or common good. So that's what I was trying to suss out. Now, you don't have to agree with that, but I was trying to understand what's the value underneath sustainability as a set of practices for positive impact. And the other thing you might think about is that I always like it when you lean into the revolutionary recommendation that you're making. It's really big, and it could. And if I'm a board member, I'm thinking, okay, how many clients are we going to lose because now we're going to need to be transparent, and basically this is going to be a stick that we're going to get beaten up with. So there's something in there that is really pretty revolutionary in what you're recommending. Now, as consultants, you could say, you brought us in because you've recognized what we've recognized, which is there is a gap between your current tool and the profound mission of our organization that you've committed this entire organization to. And frankly, it is revolutionary. It is transformative. That is the nature of the work of sustainability. And so we want to help you fundamentally own that. And we know it's complicated, and we know that there's processes. And oh, by the way, there is a lot of selling that needs to take place, all of that. But there's a way to kind of think about that. So anyway, a couple of observations. I do have one other thing, and I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to really honor and acknowledge Epson Corporation. Akiko is here, so I want to thank her for being here. And I want to share with you as a team, which we've shared, throughout. Epson has been a long-standing sponsor of the International Business Ethics and Sustainability Case Competition, and we're very appreciative of that. And we're really honored to have the participation of Epson executives as one expression of the commitment of Epson to the work that we do through the case competition. So thank you, Epson, and thank you, Akiko.
Thank you, Jeff. It's really been an honor to be a part of this competition, and I really enjoyed it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Akiko. And thank you, Jeff.